order regular meeting of Sebastopol Planning Commission of August 22nd, 2023. And we'll go start with roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Ottinger,
Here.
Commissioner Burns,
Here.
Vice Chair Fritz,
Here.
and Chair Fernandez.
Here.
Okay, all members are present and accounted for.
Okay, thank you. Item number 2, comments from the public on items not on tonight's agenda. I know we had a correspondence, but great, thank you.
Is this already on?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
Lisa Pierce, Sebastopol. So I want to talk tonight a bit about tiny homes on wheels. We all know that housing is too expensive for many people here in Sebastopol. Many people, some with deep roots here, have had to move away from their families and friends because they just couldn't afford to live here. New construction is very expensive. New ADUs are expensive too. I think a lot of people would love to have an ADU in their backyard to house family or to rent out. But once people really look at what's involved, it's pretty daunting. It's easier than it used to be with reduced fees and restrictions, but it's still a lot of work and a lot of money. A tiny house on wheels provides a much lower cost and easier option. No concrete perimeter foundation, which are very expensive, less site work and tree removal, no big construction project going on in your backyard. Let's say you're a homeowner in town with a backyard and you've got a child or a parent or a friend who would love to live close to family and friends but can't afford the going rents, let alone being able to afford home ownership. You could buy a tiny home, or they could buy their own tiny home, wheel it into your backyard, and help you pay off your mortgage by paying rent for the space. A very nice tiny home can be bought for $50,000 to $100,000. Someone can be a homeowner for $50,000 to $100,000. ADUs typically run over $200,000 when all the site work and everything else is said and done. With a tiny house, there's flexibility. Family needs change over time, and the wheels make that possible. Many cities and counties across California and even states across the country are now permitting tiny homes on wheels as ADUs. This allows them to count towards the state-mandated RHNA housing mandates for adding new housing. And I did get that information on this today that I sent to Carrie. Outside our city limits, Sonoma County recently changed its rules to allow tiny homes on wheels as temporary dwelling units, although the permit can be renewed on an annual basis. But as far as I know, these tiny homes are not allowed to be counted towards RHNA because they are permitted to be temporary instead of being ADUs. I encourage you to look over the 2 letters I sent out for more information. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Hi there, Steve Pierce, Sebastopol, and just really want to congratulate Lisa on doing so much legwork on this. It's a growing movement, and Sebastopol can be part of this growing movement to make homes more affordable and keep the next generation living here in Sebastopol, not having to move away. So I did a little looking back into our level of service report, trying to find out like how many ADUs, JADUs do we actually complete. Unfortunately, it's a little bit out of date, and I'm sure, Carrie, there might be some more recent numbers. And so as of finalized permits, there were 8 in 2018, 7 in 2019, and 4 in 2020. I hope it boosted after that. Yeah, I'm sure it did. There is interest in ADUs. We've all heard this. In fact, there was the survey from the housing element. I think it was the most approved or sought after way to get new housing was through ADUs. And we are here to help the city if they're interested in pursuing tiny homes. There's great models. Santa Cruz, I think, has probably the best one. And I think they copied quite a bit that they have from other cities. So a lot of the legwork has already been done if there is interest in pursuing this. I get the city really doesn't have a bunch of money to spend on things like this, staff time. So we're willing and ready to step up and help the city if they want to do this type of work. I want to talk real briefly about a whole nother topic. It's not near as important as what Lisa has brought up here. It's about Ives Park and an idea that I floated to Diana Rich and mentioned to Dante, and he threw over the wall to the city manager's office, and then I haven't heard anything. So this is about, Ives Park is this great location. We all know it's pretty neglected, and there are big plans for its remodel. And quite honestly, I don't know if and when, if ever, that's going to happen, because it's going to take city resources to some degree, resources we don't have. I don't want to get into the whether it should happen, but hey, it's a plan that we have as a city. I think it could take years and years. And instead of waiting for that process to take years and years, there's things we can do now that can help test the waters for opening up the park to public access. What I'm hoping to see is that between the ball fields and the bathroom, we have this open grassy area there and surrounded by this old cyclone fence put up over 50 years ago. Let's just try opening the gates. Let the people in. How are we going to react as a populace with open access to a creek? If we ever do this creek plan, we're going to be in that position anyway of having to deal with public access to the creek areas. It could be that we try it out during events. Tomorrow night, we have a big event where thousands of people have been coming down to the Barlow. If we get half that number jammed into Ives Park, we sure would wish we had some extra area there that could accommodate people. In fact, it's a straight-on view to the stage. So I understand that these things can cost money, and there might be insurance and liability issues, safety issues, and I don't expect things to move overnight, but hey, we can start thinking about what would it take, what does the city and the city attorney say about opening public access to our existing creek area. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if we do have any other public comment, I actually don't see anyone online other than the commission members. So thank you to those in the public. Anyone else in the public? All right, we are good for public comment.
Okay. Is it okay just to ask a question, just to follow up on some of the comments?
Sure,
So-
you can ask a question if it's outside of the purview of a non-agendized
Yeah.
item. I will.
Okay, so my question would be when or if we would be looking possibly for like the tiny homes issue. I know we.
So yeah, so actually I did want to talk about that because it is sort of potentially on tonight's agenda, because we're talking about the Planning Commission work plan and potential zoning ordinance updates and things like that. So I understood, and we're a little bit more relaxed in City Council, so I didn't call you out until you had to wait for that item. But if you want to stick around for that item, you can. I can give a little bit of information and background on it, which is informational and
Yeah.
therefore okay
Yeah.
in terms of the
Mhm.
Brown Act.
Is commission's okay with?
Yeah, so the city has done a couple of things recently. Actually the state recently changed the state building code to add Appendix J, which has specifications, and I'll show this with the Planning Commission. I did want to give the background before just sending it out to y'all, though, to allow tiny homes. It did not before, which was a big part of the problem. It had minimum room sizes and things like that. It still does when you look at it in terms of loft and sleeping areas and having an egress window and things like that. But it does now allow for, the state building code allows for tiny homes. Our building official did include that in the most recent adoption. So the city has adopted Appendix J, which would allow for that. Now that said, we do require permanent foundations at this point for permanent dwellings. As you know, we do have a couple of temporary and and also in mobile home parks, flexibility in those areas, because that is part of the definition of a mobile home park, even though most mobile homes are not on wheels. And in fact, West County Community Services has actually put in a couple of tiny homes at Park Village most recently. And part of that is they need to be able to evacuate people in a flood and be able to get the trailers out. And so we're actually consciously transitioning to that. Slightly different reason, but it's also an affordable way of doing those units. In terms of tiny homes on wheels or RVs or any other sort of thing like that, obviously we have the temporary use permit for the community church and the Sayers Village, where those are on wheels. You are correct; they don't count towards RENA because they're only temporary. We also, in our zoning code, do allow temporary units for a couple of different other reasons. Again, they're both temporary and not as a permanent ADU, which I understand is what you're talking about, but just to kind of understand the state of where we're at, especially in light of the work plan discussion about to come. We do allow tiny homes for caretaker units that requires a use permit and a valid need for a caretaker. And also in the event of an emergency, so like when the 2017 fires happened, for temporary housing for fire victims or other emergency victims. When we adopted that, I think 2019 is when that went into effect. Staff sat down and we did go through, okay, well, what does that look like? Because we're still responsible for making sure we have health and sanitation. And we do, for those, we do actually have a checklist, and we have that on our website of what we all require, because we do require water, sewer, electrical hookups. It's my understanding from talking to our building official after we received this communication was, you know, a lot of times in Sonoma County, they'll have a composting toilet or outdoor shower, which for stormwater runoff and pollution isn't feasible within a city where it's, you know, on a 6,000 square foot lot and not on a 2 or 3 acre site where you have septic and other types of less environmental concerns of it kind of polluting the very a more tight land resource. Although I did see actually in Ms. Pierce's letter, it sounds like the county is requiring water, sewer, or septic and electrical connections as well. So the only thing they're not requiring that we would allow for, and you know, any permanent construction is the permanent foundation. So that's really the only piece of it. I haven't looked into the actual ordinance yet, so I'd have to, but according to our building official who is aware of the county's ordinance, that is kind of the main difference. So, you know, how that might fit into your discussions tonight, we do have one of our work plan items is talking about our housing element and looking at potential updates from that, as well as potential zoning code updates. And so that is something where if you wish to discuss that, you could, as part of tonight's agenda item.
Okay. And then I also know on there is Ives Park, so we can discuss that as well when it comes up.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you for that information. All right, moving on. Item number 3, statement conflicts of interest. Tonight's agenda. See any? No minutes to approve, and so we can move on to our item 5, regular agenda items. 5A, Planning Commission work plan update.
Thank you. And so just to overview, everyone on the commission has been through this discussion before, but just for members of the public who might be listening on YouTube and those in the audience, the Planning Commission does do a work plan every year or a couple of years to organize the work that both the department and the commission would be focused on over the coming year or two. Usually the list of items in the priority list are probably a 4 or 5 year worth of stuff, but at least it kind of helps organize and prioritize. We then share that with the, once the Planning Commission has reviewed the priority for that, it's shared with the City Council for their review and adoption, and that helps for a couple of reasons. One is to make sure that council and the commission are on the same page, and so there's no surprises either way from what the council might be wanting the planning commission to work on that we don't know about, or because they have in the past placed items on the agenda, they've also said, hey, it's being dealt with in a way, let's deprioritize, something as well. So understanding city council's priorities, as well as allowing them to understand what the planning commission's priorities are and what you're planning on working on, getting a sense of if they want to have input on that at that time. And so we present them with a resolution to adopt the work plan or approve the work plan. And then that also helps a prioritized staffing, planning for that work, and if potential, putting together grant applications to be able to do that work. And right now we're actually working on finishing up the third of 3 state grants for planning work, some of which are on the update list of getting done or done tonight. So what we have for you in your packet is I did include a potential resolution to recommend it to council. I do want to say that is in no means trying to force you or get you to adopt something tonight. Usually it does take at least one discussion and then staff revising with those edits and then coming back to the commission. So that is just there just in case it's a slam dunk and everyone feels comfortable with it tonight. And then the next item that we have, and I can pull it up on the screen if people would like, is the status of our current work plan, which is adopted September of 2022, so a year ago, just about, and where we are at that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and put it up on the screen.
Sure, okay. And for anyone in the public, if there is a reference binder in the back, and since you guys are only folks, you can feel free to bring that to your seat if you want to. Pull it up. And I'll also be able to pull up the Word document for the others and edit it live as you might want. All right. Okay, let me get this to be a little bit bigger. Okay, so the first item is the vacation rental ordinance, and this was specific to the non-hosted / whole house rentals. And this is actually something that staff we needed to put on hold. We do have requirements for a use permit to do that. I know we did have some initial discussions, actually right before the housing element got started, and then things just kind of took off from there. So my apologies for that. But I kind of have the note here, looking to resume that in 2024 and finish that off after some of the kind of the current critical path items, as you'll see, are completed. The design review guidelines. So,
interrupt for a second. So, do you want to are you going to go through it and then we can go back comments, or do you want to do like section by section?
Whatever you would like, Chair.
Um,
Do you want me to just go through and do a status first, and then we can pull up the recommended
come
and have
back
you
and do
all?
that.
Or yeah, okay. So the second priority was design review guidelines, and this included, if you look at the bottom, we actually had at this as 2 sections. One was objective design standards. As you know, the Planning Commission reviewed those at I think it was your last meeting, and adopted a resolution recommending those to council. The Design Review Board has had 1 meeting. We'll be having another potentially beginning of September, and that's slated to go to council in October for their approval. So that will actually finish the objective design standards part of it. We are also working on the SB 9, which is the single family lot split. design guidelines. That's something when state law passed, we added to the scope with that design subcommittee, which is Vice Chair Fritz and 2 design review board members. We actually have a meeting on Thursday to finish our review of the draft of that for the subcommittee, and then the consultant will be making edits by the end of September. They think it'll be earlier than that, but I give them till the end of September and starting a review for that in October, coming back to the Planning Commission with that. That will actually be an ordinance because it will include changes to both the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance. And then the housing element, this was completed in January, as you're aware. So, and that was a huge effort. If I don't know if the county adopted theirs today, but they are still in hearings as of today. So that was obviously the biggest lift for staff, and the commission was very involved with that as well. For item 4, yeah, we did have SB 9 as a separate, along with any other state legislation. With COVID, they still haven't done huge changes to the legislation. Although there will be that we need to respond to, although there are a couple from our housing element that we will need to respond to. But again, I just talked about the SB 9. Electronic permitting implementation, and this, the reason some of these actually got bumped up above that vacation rental ordinance is that we received a state planning grant for $160,000 that we used for the electronic permitting software and all of the implementation work to get that going, as well as the objective design standard work. And because that actually, their final submittals, the work needs to be done by the end of this year. So it's sort of a time frame to take advantage of the funding for a project we could not have done otherwise. So that is, electronic permitting is implemented. It is live on our website and available to the public. Digitization is ongoing. And if you do have any questions about how to use that, Susie has now been trained in that, so you can just give her a call. The Ives Park Master Plan implementation. There's several components of that were completed. The Calder Creek Naturalization Study and the hydrology study work. The sculpture garden has been installed, and in fact, the Public Art Committee is working on, and Public Works is working on installing 4 additional sculpture pads, and they're going to do a call for an additional 5 sculptures for that and one of the vacant pads. And so that is that trail and entry to the park from High Street. The pathway replacement we are doing in phases due to costs. The phase 1 is funded. They have actually had their pre-construction meeting, and it's going to start September 11th. Just so you know. And that's due to some special events that were happening during the summer, the Peacetown and some of the other stuff that they wanted to be able to. I know I've personally been trying to get Peacetown back to the park for a couple of years now, just because it's our central park. And it's great to see that used. So once those are done, that work will be done. It'll only be a 2 or 3 week project to get that done. And then we have submitted a grant for phase 2, which would be the remaining part of it from the pool building, kind of around where the restrooms are, up to High Street. So that the design for that is done, and it's simply a matter of getting the funding for that. We do have from fiscal year funding identification and procurement to be able to do continued work on the engineering and design of the creek naturalization project. And there is $62,000 identified in the capital improvement plan for a couple of components of that. And I have been working with the California Urban Stream Partnership, which includes Jessica Hall, who was the Switzer fellow working with the commission, as well as Ann Riley, who you also saw, and another gentleman, Joshua Brandt. We are lucky in that Joshua and Anne are both they're the co-executive directors of this nonprofit, and they just happen to both live in or near Sebastopol. So they're very interested in the project. And so they're basically pro bono working for us. We have identified a grant that we're likely to apply for from Department of Water Resources that would allow us to do basically all the design and engineering work, with the city doing the CEQA work as basically the match to that, along with the capital improvement, the $62,000. And that's a small amount for environmental work and about $12,000 for traffic reconfiguration at that Jewel and Willow intersection. So we don't know if we'll get the grant without that, but if we do, that would make the project shovel ready and have all the permitting done. Creek ordinance update. This is one of the later ones, which we have not yet begun, but was added by the Planning Commission at the last time we reviewed the work plan. And then sort of going down the list of potential parks and recreation master plan, the lines that are underlined regarding maintenance requirements of facilities and making sure they're considered, and looking at short-term improvements, and doing the physical visits to parks like we did to Libby Park this last year. I know that was before the election, so that was October, I think. Are things that the Planning Commission added, and it as a sort of an ongoing thing until we do a kind of a larger Parks and Rec master plan. And then we have, this is sort of the zoning ordinance update section where tiny homes could be considered. There's also a few other items on here in terms of clarifying things, revising regulations that to close a couple of loopholes, to clarify items that we either staff or the commission has had to interpret because our zoning code isn't clear. I think that came up with the Benedetti Car Wash, auto use kind of stuff, as well as updates in response to state legislation. And at this point, with the bills that are still alive in the state, I don't anticipate any huge changes. They're looking at extending SB 35 potentially, but I don't think that impacts us because those objectives of science standards would be addressing that. So I don't think there will be any major things, and I'm probably jinxing myself in 2024 that we'll need to address. And then I'm going to stop there. The other items on the list are things that are identified in the general plan. So you can see there's an action listed as well as a priority in that first column, Bs and Cs generally. The general plan had prioritized A, B, and C as short-term, medium-term, long-term. I think at this point, most of the A's are gone because they've been implemented in one way or another. And so with that, I don't know, Chair Fernandez, if you want to take questions or comments on the existing work plan?
Yeah, we'll start with that. Anybody? Okay. Let's see. But we're still going to go through, right, the sections, or is this a time for comment? Or
if you have any questions about about the status of any of these,
Let's
and
do
then
that.
we'll go through the changes, which is the new proposed edits from us.
Got it. Yeah. And no questions, I don't think. I think we're good. Okay. Yep.
All right. Oops. Make sure I get the right document. Okay, so what we have done, or what I've done, is reprioritize these to try to put the things that we're currently working on up front, and then the things that we haven't gotten to, like the vacation rental ordinance, but we know our city priorities, work them into the process. So the first, the number one item I have kind of on our list is objective design standards, because we're going through adoption hearing right now between that and the SB 9 standards. Oh, I'm sorry. It looks like it is actually not showing the right screen. Thank you. Sorry. So item one, objective design standards, just because those will be adopted in the next couple months, and then they will go up the list. I've also on this removed everything that we've already completed, like the housing element. So you won't see those. I also added in the vehicle mile traveled thresholds project. The Planning Commission heard the kickoff to that and gave input a couple meetings ago, and we are actually going to council September 5th to present kind of the overview, just as we did to the Planning Commission, as well as the Planning Commission's direction to council, and make sure we have their buy-off. That is actually a fairly quick project that we anticipate being done by December. Again, that is also grant funded through a state grant. I actually just found out today that they have not made it official yet, but they're actually extending that grant deadline till sometime in 2024, which doesn't matter. If we get the work done quickly and we're engaged in it, then it just means we get to move on to other work. So I was asking the question that, like, my final invoice is due in September, but it's not going to be adopted to December. How do I do a closeout report for that? And they said, well, actually, we're extending that grant. I was like, okay. Another project that was not on the prior plan but has been added is the Sonoma County Transportation Authority did receive a grant to update the county as well as the city of Sebastopol's active transportation plan, which is old school bicycle and pedestrian master plan, now called active transportation. That is something that John Jay, our associate planner, is a liaison to that group. He's the city representative. We also have, so that has been added as number 3. It's kind of already happening. And the timing is because of the opportunity of the grant funds and the ability for the city to get that work done. Our current adopted plan is also from 2010, so it's kind of aging out. So this is actually of interest to our Climate Action Committee, and they have requested that we have a citizen representative on the SCTA's, has a countywide bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. We will be going to council next Tuesday to ask them to authorize our advertising for that. So that is probably partially because of this, but also because we have active transportation working group on the Climate Action Committee at this point. Item 4 is local hazard mitigation plan, and obviously the Planning Commission a couple years ago was critical in the adoption of this. We don't need to redo it, but the Planning Department was put in charge of reviewing, doing the annual meetings, and implementation of this by council. So it's a new responsibility to do this that was formerly in kind of the fire/building department. The Planning Department has been asked to take that on. And so I did add this in here just to say we have to do this to be consistent and in compliance with the requirements to do an annual review. And then I already had it in my department's work plan to incorporate our local hazard mitigation plan into our general plan safety element, which is the normal process for those. And we do have funding from the city council in our budget to do this year. Again, I don't anticipate this will take a huge amount of work, but it will take some staff time as well as Planning Commission review. The next new item is housing element implementation. As I'd noted before, we have a brand new housing element with a whole lot more implementation items. So this kind of can look at other items as well. And so this is probably where either this or the zoning ordinance is where something like considering tiny homes might be worked in. We have received a $250,000 grant to do workforce housing / flexible zoning modifications, as I described before, and this is kind of outlined here, looking at commercial corridors and if there are areas or parts of that or zones of that that make sense to allow 100% residential without a use permit. As you know, on the commission, you've seen a few conditional use permit requests for that 100% residential. So the thought is, are there criteria, just like for the cannabis delivery in the manufacturing zone, are there criteria that we can just outline and set up, adopt into our zoning ordinance? If you meet those standards, then you don't need to do the conditional use permit process. And so that is what that funding is for. It will also look at the Redwood Marketplace in a little bit more detail on the North Gateway and potentially some of the other properties up there in terms of potential redevelopment strategies. And so this is the only housing element implementation item I have, mostly because it's a pretty big item. But this is certainly, if the commission has other things they'd like to look at, we can discuss it under this item or figure out kind of where it might fit in the work plan. The 5B, that is actually, we aren't doing a specific plan, and I can answer what a specific plan is, but they're actually not terribly useful in a way, because they are dependent on almost every single developer buying into the specific plan. The city has done one in the past, I believe, for basically the Northeast Gateway, and it ended up not being adopted. I've also seen that kind of a thing happen in other plans. So in other cities, I'm not a huge fan of specific plan. I'm more a fan of, let's talk about the policy and the zoning and then set that in place. And then it's easier for it to happen over time. And having talked with some of the other consultants that we've been working with, most of them kind of agreed with that. So, so I'm kind of calling that item as part of that North Gateway grant project. I do have the vacation rental ordinance update as item 6. And then 7 is still that state legislation requirements. This actually does include a couple of housing element policies that we are required to do ordinance changes for. One is to increase the height limit in the R6 and R7 zone to 35 feet for all development. We already allow that for 100% residential. 100% affordable housing. This would, and this was one of the states, it's probably their biggest comment on our draft element, is that they wanted to see that for all development. And then state legislation did change the height limit for 1-story ADUs by 2 feet. We were 1 foot above, so now we're 1 foot below, so we need to go back and change that. Again, that's a minor change to our ADU ordinance. It won't take a lot of time, but it does need to go through that kind of whole hearing process. Under Muni Code kind of cleanup items, we have the same items before, but I did underline, and this was actually one that John had added, which was potentially update the Planning Commission review of use permits for some use permits to change them to a planning director review of use permits. There have been a few of these, like dog grooming and exercise facilities in downtown specifically, where outside of downtown, it's a planning director use permit because there is some level of scrutiny needed, but in downtown, it requires planning commission review. It was just something we wanted to potentially discuss. I know we had Kyle Falball commented on that at one of the hearings, and so I'd like to get a sense of the Planning Commission's interest in that. We do still have the Ives Park master plan and continued work on that. The creek ordinance is still below that because it's not actually in our general plan, but it's of interest to the Planning Commission. But again, the priority of these is absolutely up for discussion tonight. And so that's as far as I went. I did, in terms of the prioritization, and the others are on that sort of the B list, I'll say. Once we're done with this chunk of work, then some of those items will come up either as opportunities present themselves, like the Northern Gateway work with the grant, or because their other priorities are completed. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the commission for either questions or comments, or public comment and then deliberations, however
Okay.
you choose.
Let's go with any questions. And then after public comment, we can go to comments. Okay. No, that was good. Good coverage. Okay. I'll go ahead and open up public comment at this point. If anybody from the public wants to comment on that work plan.
And I can note that we did not get any public comments on this via email prior to the meeting. And again, I don't believe we have any members of the public online. Anyone here wish to make a comment in the room? Nope. All right.
All right. I'll go ahead and close. Okay, go ahead.
My question is about the tiny house, and it seems to me like right now they have to be on a foundation, which kind of takes some of that feasibility of the affordability and the ease of putting a tiny house in if you need to lay a foundation, as well as less, I would say, advantageous for homeowners. You know, it's more of a commitment than having the tiny house on wheels, even if they're, oh my gosh, I thought that was my hearing aid. Even if they're,
Sorry, I think if you go closer to the mic, that's what he's trying to correct for. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. Even if it's hooked up to the, sewer or whatever, it's still easier when it's on wheels. So there's, that. How do we bring this to the agenda? How do we move this forward? How do we kind of try to make it more feasible? And, additionally, it kind of intermingles for me with the whole issue on the vacation rentals. Because now if we have the tiny houses, are they going to be able to, rent them out? Or will that go towards our quota that we need for new housing? Will it be considered for that? Will it be able to be rented out if it does go for the quota for new housing? And as always, infrastructure, what are we going to do with all of the increased housing and the infrastructure issues we're having in Sebastopol? So I feel like it's just a much bigger picture than one of these small items, but like, how do we move this forward and look at the, kind of future of the infrastructure, and where does it sit in our housing plan?
Sure. So that's a good question. And to explore it, yes, it would be adding this to the work plan, I think would be really helpful in communicating if you're interested in that, to council. All of those questions that you asked are policy questions that would be part of the process. I could kind of give you a quick rundown of the easy way to do it that I can think of, which is, if tiny homes on wheels do count towards the state housing targets, the RHNA, regional housing target allocation, the whole point of that is permanent housing, not vacation rentals. And Sebastopol has taken a pretty strong stance on that. Our current, if they're being used as accessory dwelling units, we do anticipate about 12 per year, because that's actually the average of what we've been producing since some of the state laws changed. And that would actually be about a third of our housing stock production in relationship to our RHNA target is 213 units of the various income categories. We do have some low and very low that are deed restricted that are under construction at Woodmark, well, Woodmark is currently under construction. That 48 units will apply to this. If St. Vincent de Paul replaces the Saves temporary housing, which doesn't count towards anything, with permanent housing, they've applied for a grant in conjunction with the city for 22 units. Those would apply. Those will be deed restricted as well. So what you're not seeing is the low or moderate not deed restricted. So basically people who aren't necessarily in, and that sort of missing middle that people talk about, where you make too much to qualify for the low income housing, but not enough to afford market rate. And so I think the tiny homes and the ADUs kind of fill that gap a bit more, right? And especially if it's, some people say, well, it's just for family members. Well, yeah, but if it's a way for people to have, as most of you know, I have an ADU on my property. My mother-in-law lives there. No offense, but I wouldn't have her living in my house. She would be in another house somewhere else in town. So, it's like and it is a more affordable way for doing that and for incorporating. So our infrastructure plans and those types of things do already plan for that. We did a development impact fee study a couple of years ago that talked about the anticipated development. Fortunately for the cost, but unfortunately for the city, ADUs generally don't pay impact fees. So the park fees, the traffic fees, those types of things. But there are certainly other grants and things like that available in terms of the infrastructure. So the easy way to deal with tiny homes, if they count towards RHNA, is to consider them an ADU, not some other in addition to, but just a way of, and I think that's what the public comment was saying anyway, was instead of requiring an ADU to be on a permanent foundation, allow tiny homes to be used as ADUs. And then they're basically subject to all the same laws as an ADU, which includes the requirement to basically, and you could, the current ADU legislation says a use permit approved by the Planning Commission is required to rent an ADU short term. You could also say, hey, if you're going to do this, you just can't. There's way you can write that into legislation.
So I guess, tonight is about talking about the work plan, not anything specific
Correct.
on it.
Yep.
So my question is really, can we get this on the work plan? Is the commission interested in putting this on the work plan so that we can discuss this further?
Right. Yeah. So exactly. All of those are policy questions should you wish to discuss and consider it. Yep.
Yeah, I'd support. I think that's something we need to discuss at some point. Okay. Okay, and then we're going to open up for discussions or comments at this point.
So should we just go down
Yeah.
item by item?
Sure.
The objective design standards, I don't know if there's anything to comment. It is kind of, we're doing it at this point. We're adopting them. So that seems like makes sense to keep that at the top of the list. As well as the VMT. It's just kind of in progress already. So with the active transportation plan, is that, something that so the county's preparing that, and then that's going to come to us at some point for like a draft review or something, or?
Yeah, it'll actually come to you at a number of different points. Actually, I believe your next meeting will have kind of a kickoff presentation from SCTA and their consultant, Fair and Peers. But part of it will also be working with Sebastopol to update, the Sebastopol specific improvements. And so, yes, that will be a little bit more intense review or whether it's I don't think a subcommittee, but meetings with the commission. So And it's, I guess having it on here represents both, there will be some commission time spent on it, and learning and getting up to speed, just like every project you do, like the hydrology for College Creeks. And also, we do have a staff person who's also working on this. But just, yeah, so people aren't blindsided when, you're asked to adopt something or you're asked to review something. Why am I reviewing this? Well, because it's part of this. And in fact, those milestone updates, the September 12th, April 9th, and November 12th, those are dates they will be presenting to the Planning Commission. Those dates are already identified, at least the draft of those dates.
Okay. Yeah, just go on. You can go on to the next one. Okay.
Yeah, for the local hazard plan, I anticipate that will be, the end review will be with the consultant who did the original, and then that'll kind of mostly be informational for the Planning Commission, the incorporation of that into the general plan safety element. So that's a general plan amendment. So that will, although obviously the hard work of developing the local hazard plan has already been done and reviewed several times by the commission. So it won't be a huge lift for the commission. It'll be mostly, it's a smaller work item just in terms of staff and the commission. So, it could be moved down or up. It will get done regardless. It's, if you're trying to express priority, feel free to kind of move it down if you'd like.
So is this something that's going to, now that we have one, that we're going to be required to review every year as an annual?
An annual review is required. Usually it's with the stakeholder group. So that includes like the city staff, like the fire chief. Our stakeholder committee did include Zach Douch from the commission. So we may be asking someone from the commission to sit in. I have not even thought about that work plan yet for that because it was sort of a last couple of months handed to me. I knew about the safe general plan part of it. That's fine. But yeah, I think, most of the work will be the consultant who put it together would, and Juliana, who Presteri, who many of you met, at least virtually, will be working with her on that. So the end review, it's probably I think it's a sign off by the Planning Commission, but not an actual, I don't think you would need to be involved with the actual detailed meeting going through the full kind of update of it. So it'd be more like the annual level of service report. You're not required to kind of sit down and go through each of the elements of the general plan, but just to receive the report.
Okay, go on to the next one.
So I do have some comments about this, because I know this is one thing that I've been talking about a lot, is that, general office or general commercial zone and the use permit for housing. Something else that's kind of related, it's come to my attention recently, that I don't know if it's appropriate for this section. I mean, maybe not because we have a grant for a specific scope, but maybe in the zoning code cleanup, or just a general discussion item. I think something I like to talk about is the commercial industrial zone and housing ability to be built in the commercial industrial zone. So the commercial industrial zone is the Barlow, basically. And it's somewhat difficult to do housing in the Barlow the way the zoning code is currently written, because it has to be a secondary use to the commercial industrial primary use. And I just kind of feel like we have a really big need for housing in this community, and I don't see that we have a huge need for commercial industrial. I mean, there's still buildings at the Barlow that have been vacant since the Barlow was finished. So I'd just like us to sort of think about that. And also, as I was thinking about this, on the south side of Sebastopol Avenue is the downtown core district, and you are allowed to do 100% housing projects with a use permit, and the Barlow Crossing townhome is an example of that. And then across Laguna Parkway from the Barlow, a lot of that, like around Flynn Street and Johnson Street, those are all high density, like R7 or R6 or R7 housing, I think, R6. So that allows, higher density housing. So those two sides of, and actually, and then the west side of the Barlow is also, again, the downtown core, which also allows housing to be built, 100% housing with a use permit. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as a possible discussion item for the coming year, as something that, it could be an area where there could be more housing developed, similarly to downtown, similar to that Barlow Crossings project. We have limited downtown core zone where you can do housing, and I think adding the Barlow area. And to be honest, it kind of comes back around to, speaking of specific plans, the Northeast Area Plan, which was kind of that, what was originally envisioned as the Northeast Area Plan was to be a mixed use, and the Barlow is sort of evolving in that way anyway. We already changed the zoning to allow retail there when originally we didn't allow retail, and we started saying, why do we have to keep reviewing all these use permits for these little retail shops, and we made that change. So I think it's just something for us to consider as a way to, again, make as many possible options as we can for housing. I mean, I think the tiny houses are a great idea for housing. I think we need kind of any and all possibilities as we think about housing opportunities in Sebastopol. And I'd like to, again, throw that out there. And again, I don't know if it's probably not this item 5 because that's a specific grant for a specific scope, but maybe as a zoning code.
Yeah,
cleanup
one of the
item.
things I'm thinking, because we can do whatever we want to. This is our work plan. This is not a state mandated, locally mandated, whatever. It's something I started when I started working here. What I'm going to suggest maybe is that we change 5 to have a 5A, which is the grant thing, and then a 5B, which is other housing element in potential topics, to just kind of at least have one area to list them all, at least for now, and we can always reorganize it some other way.
Sure, that sounds good. And then kind of related to the housing element implementation, because I think one, and I don't have the whole thing memorized, but there was an item in there about, I believe, like tenant protection, and we had a presentation about tenant protection, and I think that's something that's important to consider as soon as, sooner rather than later. So I don't know where that.
Thank you for bringing that up. I actually had talked with Chair Fernandez about this before releasing this. The City Council on September 5th is actually receiving a presentation from Margaret DiMatteo, the same woman from Legal Aid who presented to the Commission. Slightly shorter presentation because it's council and they got a lot of business. So our thought was, let's not put something here. And again, we can list it underneath. I said sort of a more general stuff here, either as 5B or maybe it becomes a 6. I don't know. As another potential, but I thought was if council directs at that, after that September 5th meeting, we can add it in either before it gets the resolution from Planning Commission, if it comes back to you on the 12th, or when it goes to council, obviously. But that is absolutely one of the items that I had originally intended to put in here, and I was like, oh, council's going to be discussing it. They'll give direction on what they want to do with it. They are also, I'll update, but on September 5th, they're doing a mobile home rent stabilization ordinance as well. So that's part of the tenant protection stuff. And it looks like they're just, that does not require, it's about financial stuff, not about land use. So it doesn't need to come to the commission, but just so you're aware that they at least have, certain city council members at least are aware and interested in advocating for those things. So excellent point.
Thanks.
And then also the parking requirements we wanted to take a look at, and we talked about setting up a meeting in October. I don't know if
I
that
was
goes-
going to bring that up as we, on the
maybe that's not the
municipal
right-
code cleanup modifications.
All
That
right,
was
so
kind of
let's
further
talk
down the
about-
list.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Right, parking requirements for,
Just sort of generally, just to
Just
talk
generally,
about
okay.
parking requirements in general.
And that's when was talking about having a meeting like at the library or city hall and then doing a walking tour.
okay, so I'm going to add that down under 8, which is the muni code cleanup / modifications. Okay, so any direction from the planning commission? Do you want those other housing element potential things, implementation to be a separate item? Which may be useful if it ends up having a different timeline from the grant stuff, which we won't be starting until 2024, but you could certainly have a discussion or preliminary discussion on some of the other stuff this fall.
Yeah, I mean, I think a 5A, I mean, kind of breaking it up, and they're all kind of housing element related, but maybe subcategories make sense as a way to do that.
Okay. I'll still leave it 5A, 5B, but I'll make them kind of separate cells so they can
Yeah.
move around differently. And then I will also look through our housing element to look at what the relevant actions and policies are, because that's part of, we obviously need to be consistent with the general plan. We know the tenant right issues are in there, because that was, having Margaret present to you was actually the very first implementation thing we did.
Just before moving on to the vacation rental ordinance, I'm wondering, 'cause I know there was some kind of background information given on that during the housing element in terms of like the number of units and things like that. And is that something that staff is kind of monitors on an ongoing basis?
Yes, we do have a vacation rental monitoring service and contract. And in fact, Susie, now that we have a permanent staff person on, she is trained up and starting to work on that. That's with the same group that Alan, who had talked to you all in that ordinance discussion, has done. And in fact, I know when we went through the budget hearing discussions this year, the members of the budget subcommittee were pretty adamant that that stay in, because they had asked for 20% department cuts. I had offered that up as, well, we could go without that for a year, but both because of the housing relation, but also, hey, if they're operating illegally and they should be paying TOTs and have a business license and we're not getting that, then we need to be getting that as a city. So sort of twofold there.
And did we find that is an effective tool for bringing people into compliance? And are we finding people kind of somewhat
We
regular
are finding
basis
people.
to-
I will say that with not having a permanent staff person until Susie arrived, it was a little bit difficult the last year or so. But we certainly have had a number of people, either who they were eligible and we, as hosted rentals, brought them in through the process. I think even the bed and breakfast right next to the Barlow Townhomes, the historic house, where the commission did approve the use permit for that. I think that started out as compliance, that monitoring service. So yeah, we are seeing them. And then for those who are not supposed to be doing it, then we're able to shut them down. Any other comments or questions on item 6, the vacation rental policy from other commissioners? Any other?
7, I think we just have to do what we have to do, whatever the state laws are, and not a
Right.
whole lot of choices we have.
All right, fortunately, I think it'll, like I said, I think it'll be pretty minimal.
A lighter
hopefully,
year.
Unless they come up with something crazy. There's more CEQA updates than housing updates this year, actually, in terms of that stuff. But that doesn't require planning commission review. It just requires staff to get up to speed and modify how those all work. And that's the state legislature and the courts, so. Any comments on the, I'm just going to keep moving on, the Ives Park Master Plan?
Yeah, I've got. So I think I noticed on here.
Trying to keep the audience here. No, I'm kidding.
I'm looking at the, my notes are on the first copy, so I have to kind of, where it says maintenance requirements for new and existing facilities should be considered whenever looking at capital improvements to parks. And I know it doesn't, I like that. And I'm wondering if that should be also be considered for other projects in parks to look at maintenance requirements.
I think it probably is. I mean, having my past was as an architect who did exclusively public work. And usually the materials, and Paul, feel free to speak to this as well with your experience, the materials you choose, that type of thing, they are all, and the types of equipment you use in terms of reliability, you're trying to set all of that for maintainability. And that's, part of, it's part of actually, and Chair Fernandez, I think you asked, hey, could we do concrete instead of asphalt in Ives Park? And I was like, well, you have to balance out the cost of that. And it's much harder and more costly to repair concrete once it gets cracked by a tree than it is asphalt. So there's definitely a balance in all of that. But yes, that is definitely something that I know the public works superintendent especially looks at. And he's a very practical guy with a heck of a lot of experience. And he is always very conscious of that.
Okay. And I know that somewhere on here is consideration for, identify short-term improvements, and thanks to Kathy and, going through that. I'd like to not lose that momentum to always kind of keep in the forefront of those types of items that, what can we do and how can we, if we have to do a committee or whatever to kind of keep those things moving. If you have any comments on that as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the fact that we don't really have a parks department means that it kind of gets left behind and it doesn't really serve the community that way. I just find it really hard to do that planning and come up with those lists again, although they have been effective when we've done it in the
You
past.
definitely got stuff done.
It's just a matter of finding the time and getting together. And I was thinking about that. Maybe you or anyone else, well, we can't have 3 people on the committee. But I'd be interested in looking at some of the other parks and coming up with some low-cost improvements that we could make.
Yeah, maybe it's something that, on an annual basis, would, the Parks Committee, whatever the makeup of that is, would review some of those short-term.
Yeah, no, I think that's excellent. And I think it could even be expanded to be the full commission.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I missed from the Libby Park tour that was different from when Kathy and I walked Ives Park with Dante is the public works interaction. They weren't able to make it as an evening meeting, but I kind of gone, well, if we could do that as a special meeting where it's during the day, or it's the Parks Committee, which can meet during the day when Eric Billings and Dante are available, then I think it's just that much more effective because it's a little hard at least for me, to try to translate all of that stuff over. And then, we kind of also missed the conversation where Dante was able to say in Ives Park, oh yeah, that's no big deal. We can do this and that or the other. We can paint that, light pole, or like, is this something that would be better to be done by volunteers versus not? I know, and then some of the bigger projects like the Libby Pond fencing, which is, I don't know if you know the history of this, but this was a idea that I had, and I'll take full responsibility for it. I was a free range kid, grew up with free range water, and the fence at Libby Pond is degrading, and Dante had come up with some maintenance budget, but it would have been a chain link fence. And I said, we don't want any more chain link fences around in our parks if we can help it. I know our commission is going to have an issue with that. It was too expensive to do otherwise. So I said, well, why don't we just take it down? There was a significant community concern, mostly because there's a preschool right there, which I understand, and a huge children's playground. And so the fence did not come down. And I started learning my lesson there, and I kind of go, Ives Park, the whole point of the Ives Park naturalization is that it will reduce the city's liability to the point where we can take that fence down. And so that is part of, it's not the only motivation, but it is a motivation and a advantage of the naturalization project, is that if you have built up the banks to be an unnatural form like they are with the Sackreed and everything, that you have liability for that. If it is a natural creek slope, then it's a natural creek and you don't. So that's kind of the big thing about the fence. And I don't know about just let's try it out. Like I said, I tried that with Libby Park and I got my tail handed to me on a plate, so to speak, by the community. But it's, I think, that for Libby Park, that is actually potentially turning into a potential Rotary project in terms of fundraising and work, hopefully with some input from the Parks Commission. So there are some definitely the short-term things that come out of that we have on this list, but also some of the bigger long range, and Rotary is always looking for projects or often looking for projects to be able to do. And so that helps us identify those as well within the specific parks. So right now I actually had that as part of the Parks Master Plan, which is kind of bumped down to B, to not be on the numbered priority list. I don't know if you want me, do you want me to move the short-term park improvements up under the Ives Park?
I'd like to see that.
Okay. And just so you know, the reason for the Park Master Plan being demoted is this is actually something that I used to do as a consultant. So it's something we could totally do in-house in a downturn when there's no projects coming in and the planning department's not so busy. Like we can do this in-house and not have to pay a consultant for it. If we did it now, we'd have to pay a consultant because they just don't have time or capacity. So
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm just wondering, in terms of like the short-term improvements and things that we've identified, both at Ives Park and at Libby Park, I'm just wondering if we should, or if we could have on this list as just like a check-in on where things stand with that. Because I know things have been crossed off the list, but has everything been crossed off the list, or is there still a list? And what is the list? I don't know what that list looks like at this point. Because I know they have done some things.
The list that I've been working to create were short-term, low-hanging fruit projects, and then identifying some other things. But the other things that we've identified are obviously still on that list because they're not low-hanging fruit. And then, of course, with Ives Park in particular, we need to do that master plan so we can pretty much throw everything out until we're looking at that master plan. And I think this, right now with Libby Park, I think the priority is to plan what that fence is going to be and keep up the regular maintenance. But maybe if Ives Park gets moved along, another item to look at would be improvements at Libby Park, including more landscaping and naturalization for the long term. I also thought some other additional trees in more areas would be a good start for that. But it might actually require a master plan to decide what to do with those areas too. So those aren't really low-hanging fruit.
I'm wondering if there should be another, because we did the Libby Park tour last year. I mean, should we be doing maybe another, like this park around the community center or some other park tour to,
Yeah, I was gonna, on short term, it says consider physical visits to parks on an annual basis. I wanted to make that as, do the physical visits on an annual basis. We should be, as park commission, we should be reviewing that. And we can move that in priority because it's not necessarily an expense item. It's just planning for it and,
Right.
doing the
Right.
tour
And so
stuff.
I'm going to change that to do physical visits to parks, parentheses, at least one park annually. That way it's a clear metric.
Yeah, and I think it's good to keep that list growing for more parks than just Ives Park, because Rotary has been great funding Ives Park and Libby Park as well. And if we don't identify the thing we'd really like to have, then they'll come up with something else. So
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, I'd also like to put on here as a note, just for my own kind of reminder, or the director chair meetings, consider this as a special daytime meeting to be able to include public works.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely helps to have them there because, we want to hear right from them, and it solves it right away because they can come up there. And then I have another comment, but whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I'm ready. I just want to
Okay.
save work before I.
So I don't know if this falls under the parks or not, but heard of the Apple Blossom Trail. Just wanted to kind of keep that alive as far as possibly reviewing that. There's some opportunities that may be closing. For example, the owner of the cemetery is supportive of having like an easement go through his property. He's getting up there in age. When that property changes hands, who knows if they're going to have the same attitude or not. So those types of opportunities, and then also a trail through the creek area. There's a couple of landowners that are wanting or encouraging to have a path go through their property that might connect it. So I just don't want those things to kind of disappear, and it's kind of urgent that we at least take a look at that.
Sure.
sense.
So the active transportation plan is going to be reviewing pathway networks and potential pathways. I know the Apple Blossom Trail has come up before. I've actually met with Lynn Diedler about it in the past. It does include private property, which is, there's definitely some willing folks out there, I think, that he's tracked down, which is wonderful. But I know council has decided not to put that on in the past.
The last council.
The last council, but this is a new active transportation plan, and so that would be the process for vetting that, would be through that.
Great.
Uh,
Yeah. Okay.
And my comment on that too is what I understood is that since it's not on the city's map, you still could form a nonprofit and go to these individuals and work to get an agreement with them individually on the private properties, so that it could happen in the future, and they can be written so that if it does happen.
Right, you could record an easement, which goes with the land,
Yeah,
basically.
it's just a bureaucratic and probably an expensive thing,
Yeah.
but it could be done in advance,
Mhm.
even though it hasn't.
And it also
happened.
makes a difference for, like, let's say you're repairing a sidewalk in a pathway that potentially could be part of it. Well, if it's on the master plan, the city, they could say, well, okay, well, if we do it this way, that might allow a pathway versus, then having to come back through and tear it up.
Right, that is actually, when you look at the circulation element of our
Yeah.
master plan, it had the Abbott Avenue extension. And so that when the Benedict Car Wash went to council, they asked for the sidewalk easement for that potential extension. So yeah, that's exactly how those types of longer range planning pieces work.
Great. Okay.
Okay, and one for the other housing element implementation items. We have the tenant rights, tiny homes for ADUs, or could you do tiny homes as a regular home? You know, I often get asked, is there a minimum size for a house? Because some communities have that and we do not. So you could
Do it.
potentially do it for your primary home, right?
Yeah.
It's the commercial industrial zoning housing opportunities. I don't know if that's in our master plan at all. I mean, in our housing element at all, mostly because of the floodplain issues are more significant there. But I'll look through our housing element to see if there's anything related. Any others? I mean, obviously the council might bring to light something that they would want to work on, but if there's anything else from the housing element that you feel should be prioritized.
To be honest, I can't remember everything we put into the housing
I
element, so
know.
off the top of my head, I don't really have anything.
And what I was going to suggest is, you know, if you want to continue this to the next meeting and sort of revise that and take a chance to go back and look at that, I think, you know, it might be helpful for that if we're having a housing element implementation, are there other items would be a good time to prioritize, look through the housing element since it is brand new and see if there are any other items that you'd like to priorities that might not be part of that bigger grant. And kind of at least talk about what your priorities are. I do know the housing element does have dates associated with it in terms of what the expectation is of when we look at certain things. Just like this work plan, sometimes those change around, but it might be worth taking a look at if you'd like.
Yeah, I think we got enough changes that I would think that we'd want to come back and so we have an opportunity to look at that.
Great. And for timing, I'm just going to put TBD because I think what it ends up being, and I can talk to Chair Fernandez about this, is a discussion item to talk about it a little bit more,
Yeah.
or the various items a little bit more and get some further direction. After we kind of get this list together and it goes to council and we make sure we are on the same page with what they want us to address. You know, they could say missing middle or something because we have the City Ventures 80 units market rate and we have the low income from Woodmark and St. Vincent de Paul, but we don't have that moderate middle income stuff. So, you know, there may be kind of missing components that we want to look at.
And I think some of the, you know, at least the thoughts I have about this, some of the municipal code cleanup items could, again, make other kinds of housing easier to do and some other districts. So I think it's important to take a look at that stuff as well.
Right, like Katati did a cottage housing, which I haven't looked at in infinite detail, but it's the type of housing I think is appropriate for Sebastopol when you look at the co-housing and some of the other projects in town.
I mean, I think the order and everything of this is good. I don't really have any comments about that. And I just like to reiterate, I appreciate that we do this now. I like having this kind of annual check-in and have an idea of what's coming up. And I think it's good to help us kind of focus our attention on things and kind of keep things in our minds as that we do have a lot of stuff to do.
That's what John said when I had him review this. I was like, we're working on a lot of stuff. I'm like, yeah, we are. But again, you know, there's 9 items on here. They're not all going to get done in 1 year, but it is sort of that, because some of these things you do, you know, projects take a lot of time. So like the Calder Creek started in 2013, you could say. And here we are 10 years later, well, we've done some significant steps and we're looking at some more concrete actions to move a major piece of it forward. You know, that is, for better or worse, that is how public projects go. So.
But it is also nice to see that we are getting some things done.
Yeah, that's why I like to do the status. I'm one of those people, I love to check stuff off the list.
Yeah, and I think it should be incorporated just like annual budget reviews and so forth, so we don't lose this down the road, that this should be part of our routine. It's part, maybe we should add that to the,
We did not add that to the regulations to provide flexibility for
That's what I
any
was just
future
thinking about
directors,
that.
if you recall. So I said, you know what, I don't want to box someone in a corner. Hopefully I'm here for long enough
Yeah,
that it
but-
becomes a tradition that,
Yeah.
you know.
but that's the thing, is this good traditions somehow get lost down the road. But I think it's something that maybe should be added to that. Let's see. Oh, under Planning Commission request to review the food truck, I think that's an important part, because there's a lot of out of compliance, and then just from a responsibility standpoint. But also to go with that, and maybe, I don't know if it goes in this section or another section, but the consideration of having a food truck pad basically ready, that a truck could just pull right in, plug in, and be able to operate. And that would have to be possibly something in the city.
Would this be a private property improvement? Because our code already allows that. We actually have regulations for a food court. So if someone on a private property, vacant lot or something, wanted to do a food court, we already allow that.
Okay.
We just haven't had any interest in that. Although I know John and I did talk with one person who was looking at purchasing a property and was interested in that.
I was kind of thinking maybe that the city should also have, a pad.
I would probably discourage that, just because cities competing with other commercial venues can
But
be
if the commercial
problematic.
venues are closed and there's, right? Especially at nighttime, and there's no place, people serving alcohol and there's no food available. And
Got it.
if you look at it from a business standpoint, a food truck operator isn't going to, if they have a choice to come to Sebastopol and, be there versus go somewhere else where they might get more business, especially when it's kind of more inconvenient. Now, if they can just drive right up, and there's going to be more incentive to do that and done right, and also, create a space for that. I'm even thinking, and this might be something to talk with Chamber of Commerce, but provide some kind of subsidy program so that food truck business can come in and be there a period of time for people to start getting used to the fact, there's going to be a food place there. But sometimes, a food operator with their license they have to get, and all the just not economic feasible. So it might be something that between different business operations, whatever. But I don't know if commission, but I've seen that in other communities.
Is there, I don't know really much about food trucks, but theoretically, they don't really need anything, right? They're self-contained. They can pull up and do this, it's like they don't have to connect to
Usually
power.
they're
Or they don't.
self-contained. Sometimes they can connect to power. Usually they're self-contained, and they go to what's called a commissary at night, which is where they do their stock up and their, all that kind of stuff.
What would prohibit, someone from pulling into the plaza parking lot at 8 o'clock to, would they need a business license, or what would they need to be able to do that?
Yeah. And so actually we ran into this in a slightly odd way recently with the Apple Fair. We did have someone who got a business license to do a food truck, which is fine. In our commercial zones, you can be in a on-street parking space for, I think it's up to 2 hours at a time in our zoning code. So we already allow that on a public street. We don't provide hookups or anything for them, but we do allow them to be on city streets in commercial zones. Now, this person did a unhooked food cart kind of trailer, and they put it on a residential street. So basically, they didn't want to pay the Apple Fair fee, so they put it on in the neighborhood next to it, and that is not appropriate. As you can imagine, the person who lived there was like, "What's going on? Why is someone parked in front of my house?" So I've interpreted that to be in commercial zones, not in a residential neighborhood where you're parking in front of someone's house.
Can you do it? Could you do it in a city lot, or is it only the city streets? And would city streets also apply to Caltrans streets, or would it just be city streets?
So I think it applies to any city street. which would be all over Commercial Street, because otherwise they're pretty limited. It's not,
Mhm.
it's, you're in a parking spot with a valid vehicle license,
Mhm.
right? So,
I'm just wondering, because I know Caltrans has this thing about retail and Caltrans right of way.
right, but you're able to park, I mean, frankly, we have got junk removal trailers all over town, which I would like to see removed. And I've been told if they have a valid vehicle license, they can park.
Mm.
So they're
Mhm.
basically doing business because they're doing advertising. So to
Mhm.
me,
Same thing, yeah,
same thing.
yeah.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but that would be my interpretation of it. If I'm being told by lawyers that we can't do, 'cause when I get complaints about the junk trailers
Yeah.
that are unhitched and just sitting there for days and days, that we can't do anything about them, then,
Yeah.
you know.
I wonder, Everett, if it's something that just like it just like I said, like maybe partnering with the chamber or someone to kind of just encourage this to happen. I mean, it sounds like there are ways that it can just happen. So maybe there's some, like it could be made an event or something like second Thursday is food truck day or
in
something, or food truck
conjunction with the
evening or
chamber thing.
something.
Yeah.
And the food trucks park at 8 o'clock or whatever for a couple hours, or I don't know. And yeah, it seems like either like the
Yeah, I-
Plaza lot or on Main Street or Burnett Street
I've seen
lot.
that done in Denver, in my daughter's neighborhood. They would get an email from a friend and said, tomorrow, starting at 4:30 till 8:30, it's a taco truck night. And it would be at a certain house, and then everyone comes, puts their lawn chairs out. Kids ride their bikes up and down the street. It was great fun. And I don't know what kind of permits they needed to hire a taco truck for a couple of hours, and about once a month in the summer. It was a lot of fun to go to, and I think neighborhoods would enjoy doing that if we allowed it.
I could say maybe things have changed, but I tried to do a food truck event here once a month, and nobody had any interest in it. I was like, what is wrong with you people? So I mean, things changed. Merchants come and go, and they might be, but that's exactly the way to encourage it. It also encourages people to come downtown. It encourages community. It makes people remember Sebastopol, that we have fun things to do here. I did notice going out of town, I don't know if it's in city limits now, on the
Across from the
right-hand
hotel?
side, there is somebody with just a cart set up on the street selling tamales all of a sudden. They've been there every day. So, I mean, people are getting creative financially to make more money and doing these things. So I think it's a win-win, but I don't know who would take that on. It'd probably be the chamber, but
Yeah. Well,
I tried.
yeah, and one of the reasons I bring it is because when alcohol licenses come to the commission, the requirements are that they need to serve food.
Yep.
As long as there's some alcohol, and that's not happening because some of them are just not economic feasible. So this
They don't
is
have access to food.
right.
Like Jasper's, before they closed, they didn't have a commercial kitchen.
Right. So this is a way to have them be compliant without causing a problem for them to close down or something. So that's why I think it falls under our, in some ways.
I would say yes, but I would say that's a huge staff capacity and ask.
No,
To try to do something as a city to do that. You know, we have so many other competing
yeah, no,
priorities.
I don't think it should. I think it's something that perhaps, say, a representative from commission goes and visits some of these businesses or has a meeting and see, hey, let's come up with solution. How, this, you're supposed to be serving food. How can we help you to resolve this, or what can we do?
There is a brewery in Santa Rosa, a few of them, who do have food
Yeah.
trucks that come
They
just
come
for
right
that,
there,
and
yeah.
they've gotten a big following. So it
Mhm.
might be
Yeah,
something.
and that seems to
Yeah,
work
no,
out.
and I think, get Roy Choi and that would be the
Yeah.
the star,
Absolutely.
the star-studded version. But yeah, we do have some food trucks in town, as you all know. We have one at O'Reilly's and Monday through
Awesome.
Friday. I wish they were there on weekends, and I've tried to
Yeah.
go up on weekends. Down at R&B Market and
The one
El
across from the
Coronel
hotel.
has one, but of course their food truck goes somewhere else because they have the restaurant here.
Mhm.
Are there others?
Across from the hotel. The
Yeah, that's the R&B Market.
Oh,
I
R-
think that's what it's called. Yeah. Yeah, the gas station.
got
Thank
it.
you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we have a few, but you're right. I think about sort of the economic development and the town I was from, which was 5,000, so a little bit smaller, they had one night a week that the businesses were all kind of open till 9. So it was like, it was always Thursday night. I know because I was in high school. I worked that night at the Benjamin Franklin. It was a set night. So if people needed to do shopping at night, they would know what night it was. And if you combine that with events or kind of taco truck court kind of a thing, it could certainly be a potential draw for, the downtown businesses or the business district. I do think, yeah, the chamber would be an interesting folks to talk to about that.
Okay.
And they do have a parking lot, so they could actually
Yeah.
utilize their parking lot for that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to them because I think from the commission, but yeah, you're right. It's not something that staff needs. I think it's like some kind of committee to kind of come together and do that. So that's
Yeah,
okay.
but I think in general, our zoning ordinance allows
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I see what you're saying with the connection to the, but what is the city's responsibility for making sure that people have all the resources they need to comply? But if there's a way that we could, as a community, encourage that, that'd be great.
Okay. Let's see. And also, I'm looking at my notes are not in sync. I don't know if we're done with that section. I was looking at the rights of nature ordinance. Where does that fall under?
That is not on the prioritized list, but I'm glad you're back. It's on page 5. It's one of the sort of the B items.
Yeah.
And I actually did talk with Councilmember Maurer about this because we have gotten a couple emails from a couple of people who are interested in working on this. And I did talk to them about what that would potentially entail, which would be they have people who are kind of interested in doing some of the research about who has done this. There's a few communities who have, a couple in California. And I've asked them to kind of gather those resources and get them to staff, because I think that's probably a first step, or staff, and we can share it with the commission as well. And that it was probably kind of a timeline of, next year's work plan, looking at sort of some discussions and things about that. So yeah, that is actually, and I thank you for calling that up, because that is the one of these other components. The rights of nature, we've gotten a couple of comments from people interested in that. And then the dark sky regulations comes up from time to time because of, you've heard the complaints about the recent Healdsburg Murphy and those types of things. We do have that in our objective design standards and in our SB9 standards, actually, as requirements. So that's kind of how we're trying to move that forward without trying to do a full-on ordinance of that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, because it says consider, I just wanted to change that word to review or establish.
That is the general plan language.
Oh,
So what it
okay.
is doing is it's saying the city doesn't have to adopt it, but they should look into it, discuss it, deliberate it. So your general plans normally don't say you have to do
But it's our
something.
work plan, right? We can say.
It's your work plan, but you can't do a general plan amendment here. This is the action
So
of the,
considering, got it.
yeah, this
Okay,
this
I
is a
understand.
direct quotation from the general plan.
Got it. Okay, but it sounds like you have enough interest that it keeps it a priority, so.
Yeah.
That's good, okay.
And that's kind of the same thing with the tree protection ordinance. I know there has been some interest from John and Becky Duckles to update that. Most of that work would probably be done with the design review board, who's also a tree board, as the lead on that. But again, it's a staff capacity issue at this point. So. Okay, and I will say one of the things when we talk about parking regulations, we do actually have in the general plan, we used to have in lieu parking fees for downtown. And there is an action under community design of in lieu parking fees, and consider the collection of in lieu parking fees to fund the construction of city parking lot / garages. So that is something I'm going to request if we talk about changing parking requirements, that we kind of look at those in tandem, because I think that's, some of the balance that comes in.
So do we agree that you're gonna kind of bring this, kind of take another pass at this and then bring it back to us for?
Yeah, so if-
we're not gonna do a ordinance or a
Resolution
resolution
tonight.
tonight.
Yeah, so I would suggest we, that the commission entertain a motion to continue the item to the September 12th. Is that the next, September 12th, Planning Commission meeting, and direct staff to revise and resubmit.
But is it to continue it, or because if we give you directly, you're going to come back with the comments, and then I guess it's technically continuing?
Yeah, it doesn't really
Okay, so,
matter. It's not
yeah.
an item that requires a notice,
Got it.
but it's just for anyone out there, then they'll know that we'll bring it back to you
Okay.
on the 12th.
Is there any other subjects on there? Let's see. One thing, and it's just under historic resources,
Mhm.
it talks about buildings and so forth. What about like agricultural history or
Well, it would have to be related to a physical component. There's a couple of things on that.
Yeah.
There are, when we do environmental review, we do consider historic resources under that guise. So if someone wanted to come in, like we do have, in terms of historic structures, or I'll call them potentially historic structures or contributing structures to a district. There's the picker cottages that are potentially, they're a part of the heritage, I'll say, not historic with a capital H, but they're part of the heritage. And then there's the priority conservation area, the Laguna, I think includes a couple of the farms out there. But when we do CEQA review for a project, environmental review for a project, there is a section that talks about farmland. We don't have any farmland within city limits though. So that's like the farm just north of the high school is actually considered a value, high value farmland. So in terms of if someone wanted to annex and develop that would be an issue, kind of a thing.
did we go through all? Did we cover all the subjects?
I think so. And again, feel free to look through the housing element now that we've kind of had this conversation. And if you have anything you'd like me to, I can take notes and bring up at the next meeting. We
Okay.
can do that because we can still kind of add in minor edits and things and still adopt it at that time. That's
Okay.
fine.
I'd like to go ahead and then make a motion for continuance then. For the next,
I'll second.
okay? Cool.
Okay. Commissioner Ottinger? Vice Chair Fritz?
Aye.
And Chair Fernandez?
Aye.
And Commissioner Burns needed to step out.
Yep.
So 3 with 1 absent. Okay. And I am going to suggest, Chair Fernandez and commissioners, that we wait with the training video. And part of that is we have a potential new commissioner in a little bit, which would be great
I
to.
would make the same suggestion, so no problem here. Rest commissioners okay
Yeah,
with
I
that?
was going to suggest the same since Debbie left and
Yeah.
and
Good.
so might as well wait till we have 5 of us here
Yeah.
and
Perfect.
Okay, so let's move on to if there's any subcommittee updates. And if not, then planning director's report.
Okay. Subcommittee updates. I will say we do have a design guidelines subcommittee meeting this Thursday to hopefully finish the review of the SB9 regulations, and then it'll be up to the consultant to finish what will end up being kind of the same kind of a booklet, but staff will be writing the actual implementing ordinances. And so we anticipate but basically what I have on here is we'll have our edits to the consultant by August 31st, and they'll have their edits due to us by end of September, although they anticipate much earlier than that. I said, I'm going to give you plenty of time to work it out, be flexible, because it's going to take me that long to write the ordinance, and that will then come back to you all in October, probably at your first meeting. The other items of interest coming to, so the first thing I want to note is the fire ad hoc special town hall meeting scheduled for Thursday has been canceled as of this afternoon. They are planning to instead do, and they have not yet scheduled, but do a special city council meeting / town hall meeting all at once. So that's the first item that I found out today and wanted to let you know. The September 5th is the next city council meeting. We have a few items on that. The Climate Action Committee has completed an electrification survey. You probably got notice of the survey if you get a city newsletter earlier this year. They have compiled that. They won't be presenting it, but they will be submitting those results and then presenting it at a later council meeting with potential next steps for that. Again, the countywide Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee citizen rep will be on, this will be on the consent calendar, so not discussed, but just a formality to get council approval to advertise for that. I will let you all know and send out a link to that application should you know anyone who would be interested in applying for that. We will also be talking about the VMT vehicle mile traveled report to council. And I think that is it for that one for planning commission items. Let's see. The planning commission interviews for the person who did submit that is scheduled for September 19th. And that is confirmed at this point, so that's great. That means that the soonest they would potentially be on is October 3rd. So, or sorry, the first meeting in October, the second meeting in September. Which one is it? September 26th. So then we would be back to a full complement of folks, and so that'll be kind of an introductory meeting if he is appointed by council. Other things going on, the Woodmark construction is ongoing. Let's see, we just met last week, so I don't know. I don't want to be redundant. I don't know if we have a whole lot of updates, more what's coming up to city council than anything else. So I'll just stop there unless you have any questions on items.
I think I do.
Cool.
Great. All right. Thank you. I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Recording stopped.